4 weeks. And during this time, we're continuing to offer all of our virtual programs. We have our virtual group exercise classes, virtual personal training. We have a wide array of arts and culture programs, from author talks to theater, and special programs such as this. So we hope that all of you will continue to stay engaged with us virtually as we wait out the current closure, and we look forward to welcoming everybody back onto campus as soon as we're able to do so. And with that, I'd like to welcome Jason Zeidel, the president of the board of the MJCC.
Thanks, Steve. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this PDX Business Series Zoom event. I'm Jason Zeidel, the president of the MJCC Board of Directors and a longtime member. Something that a lot of people don't know about me is that for many years I've been active in advocating for criminal justice reform. The low-hanging fruit in this fight has long been the criminalization of cannabis, as enforcement of these laws has disproportionately affected people of color. In 2014, I was proud to be actively involved with Measure 91, which successfully legalized cannabis in Oregon for adult use. After this measure passed, I remained involved with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission in helping craft the new regulations by serving as on one of their rules advisory committees. This month, voters in Oregon passed Measure 110, decriminalizing possession of personal use amounts of all drugs and shifting the focus of drug abuse from being a criminal concern to being a public health issue where it belongs. Oregon has long been a trailblazer on this issue, and the success of our legal cannabis market shows that taxing and regulating it like alcohol works well for our local economy. I'd now like to thank our sponsors. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, Congregation Neve Shalom COVID-19 Outreach and Services, and thanks to our series sponsors, Barry and Carla Benson, Gewurz Menashe, Portland State University, Jonathan Singer of Barg Singer PC, the Jerry and Helen Stern Grandchildren's Fund of OJCF, Stuart Gordon Strauss, Architect PC, and Turner Construction Company. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Jeff Mazer. Jeff is the CFO of Wild, the largest cannabis edibles company in the U.S. Jeff has over 30 years of experience in financial management, strategic analysis, capital market transitions, and in corporate and business law. Prior to joining Wild, Jeff was the founder of a consulting firm which worked with growth stage organizations around the world. If Jeff looks familiar, he's presented at the MJCC's Business Breakfast before on smart cities and on blockchain technology. Jeff?
Great, thank you, Jason. The business of cannabis has been around for millennia, but the business of buying and selling legal cannabis is new. So I think we'll have an interesting panel with people who have been involved in different pieces of this burgeoning legal cannabis industry, and I'll introduce the panel, and then each of us will give a short presentation to open up for questions afterwards. Our first panelist is Jeff Sugarman. Jeff Sugarman is a 30-year campaign veteran and lobbyist. Most notable achievement was serving as campaign manager for the Oregon Death with Dignity Act in 1994. In 1998, Jeff ran the campaign to pass Oregon's Medical Marijuana Act, then served on advisory committees setting up the program. In 2013, he wrote and passed legislation to regulate and license medical dispensaries, paving the way for legalization. After legalization, he's been involved in all laws and rules developed to implement the industry as a lobbyist for the Oregon Cannabis Association. Jeff is currently the Chief Compliance Officer for GW, a vertically integrated cannabis company that holds 30 licenses in Oregon and California with brands such as Sarah, Electric Lettuce, Pharma, Canadaddies, and 50 Trees. He serves on the board of the New Leaf Project, a Portland not-for-profit that helps BIPOC owners succeed in the cannabis industry. He'll be leading an effort for a statewide social equity bill in 2021. Which dovetails nicely into our second panelist, who's Jeanette Ward Horton. And Jeanette is the co-founder of the New Leaf Project, an initiative to build wealth and opportunity via the legal cannabis industry for communities most harmed by the war on drugs, specifically African American, Native American, and Latinx communities. To that end, New Leaf Project works to increase the number of successful cannabis businesses owned by people of color through funding, education, business coaching. As well, New Leaf Project helps professionals of color find their path to careers in cannabis. New Leaf Project is the only organization of its kind in the US that grants and loans the majority of its funds to cannabis businesses owned by people of color. Jeanette founded New Leaf Project, building on her experience as founding vice chair of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, the first nonprofit organization created to service the specific interests of minority cannabis entrepreneurs, investors, and patients, and today is the leading organization for national equity policy and advocacy. Jeanette joined the cannabis industry in 2015 to lead marketing and public relations for global cannabis technology company Akerna, the first cannabis technology company listed on a major US exchange. Prior to the cannabis industry, Jeanette had a 15-year career in communications and marketing at Fortune 100 companies, including Coca-Cola and Home Depot. Jeanette has a BA from Spelman and an MA from Georgia State University, and lives in Portland with her husband and 2 young sons. Just before we turn it over to Jeff Sugarman, the key themes that I want to emphasize is that cannabis, as I'm sure people on this call know, is still illegal under federal law, the same as heroin or cocaine. But legalization for medical or adult use is controlled by state law. Oregon's been a leader in legalization, first medical use, recreational use, now decriminalization. But because we're illegal under federal law, we're required to use specific business practices, including licensing of all businesses and employees and seed to sales tracking. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff. Jeff?
Thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here today. As Jeff said, I am the Chief Compliance Officer for a company called Groundworks Industries. I've served in that capacity for the past 5 years. And we are an Oregon-owned and Oregon-based company that has a number of retail stores, as well as a kitchen and a grow operation and a distribution facility. And we're duplicating that effort, just starting to duplicate that effort in Los Angeles. What I want to start with today is to just run through a little bit of the history of marijuana in Oregon, just for a couple of minutes, and then talk a little bit about the state of the industry today, and then turn it over to Jeanette to talk about some of the work that Wild and Groundworks and a bunch of other organizations are going to be involved in around social equity in the next legislative session. So as Jason mentioned, Oregon has a long history of trying to legalize or decriminalize marijuana. It actually started back in 1973 when Oregon became the first state to decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana under the administration of Governor Tom McCall. We operated that way for about 15 or 25 years. There were a couple of efforts in there to put legalization measures on the ballot that were unsuccessful. In 1998, we were able to join in an effort with a group called Americans for Medical Rights, who were involved in a national effort to begin the legalization of medical marijuana. That year, in 1998, Alaska, Washington, and Oregon all passed medical marijuana laws. In Oregon, what that allowed was a patient to receive a card that would allow them to be essentially free from criminal prosecution, and it also allowed them to establish a primary caregiver. Back in those days, the original measure allowed that patient or that caregiver to grow 4 plants and possess 3 ounces. And it stayed that way until about 2005, when there was a legislative effort to add a grower's card. And this really changed the industry in very significant ways, because it allowed growers to essentially serve multiple patients. They called it card stacking back in the day. And they were allowed to grow 4 plants for each patient. And it set up essentially a system where growers would provide an ounce a month for their patients, and the rest of it really was theirs to do with as they pleased. In 2013, as Jeff Mazur mentioned, we licensed medical dispensaries. I was involved in that effort, and what that allowed us to do was realize that there had been, starting I guess around 2010, medical dispensaries were popping up all over the state, particularly in the Portland area. When we passed the law regulating and licensing them in 2013, we estimated there were about 200 medical dispensaries operating in the state with no licensure, no regulation. And so that bill passed and we set up that system. Then, of course, in 2014, Measure 91 passed, and in 2015, we set up the program. Two of the key things I want to mention about the legalization program. One is that, unlike many other states, Oregon really sought to bring in everybody from the medical industry that wanted to participate. So our barriers to entry were relatively low. We had the lowest licensing fees in the country, and we still do to this day. And we brought in, we offered an opportunity for all of those dispensaries, all of those growers and processors to be a part of the recreational market. So today there are right now 2,302 active cannabis licenses in the state of Oregon, with another 1,200 that are in the queue. 2,100 of those are producers licenses, 1,000 of them are retailers licenses, and the rest are either processors or wholesalers or research facilities. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is a really tremendous growth in both the sales of marijuana, where we are consistently over $100 million a month in sales right now, and in taxes, where last year we distributed, collected and distributed over $133 million in tax revenues that went to a variety of sources, including the state school fund, drug and alcohol treatment, cities and counties, and state police. In addition to that, most cities and counties who have opted into the recreational program also levy a 3% tax on retail sales, and those funds are delivered to them directly. So that'll give you a kind of an idea of where we're at. I know, you know, a couple of the other things that I think we did decently well as we were setting up the program is we removed cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act in Oregon and did some other things to really try and reduce the criminal penalties around possession of marijuana. But what we didn't do well is repair the harm from the war on drugs. And one of the things that Wild and Groundworks and New Leaf Project are involved in is a bill for the next session that will establish a social equity program and will fix some of the criminal laws. And with that, I would like to turn this over to Jeanette Ward Horton, who is the executive director of the New Leaf Project, and welcome her to our event today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here and to talk about this subject with you all. So Jeff gave a really good overview of the industry and where it is, and it sets the stage for me to then dive into the work that we're doing around cannabis equity. And we'll just start there. We'll start with that piece of the work that New Leaf Project does, because it helps knit the story of how well legalization went and how well it didn't. So we've got a good industry in Oregon, and Jeff spoke to it already, in terms of it being much lower hurdles of entry versus other states. Oregon's great at developing small business. So for me, it's seeing small business kind of policies and ideas applied to cannabis more so than other states have done it. Conceptually, we have unlimited licenses, which is really a good approach. We have low licensing fees, so positive. And we've also built a really thriving industry. So Jeff spoke to how much taxes have been collected. We've got just really great innovations here in Oregon, and climate here in Oregon, and enthusiasm about the plant in Oregon. And so we've got great products. Wild is here, and I think that's no accident. That's kind of showing what I'm saying, is that, you know, our largest edibles company is right here, based in Berthoud, Oregon. So those two great things about the industry make it a good place for anyone to start a business. But then you have to layer on in cannabis what I had someone describe to me who had worked on a lot of cannabis activism, going from state to state to get laws passed for medical markets. The unintended consequences of not realizing that the industry would look, if you don't mind being frank, would look very white, and the ownership and the folks benefiting financially from what has been a very lucrative industry don't look at all like the people who were arrested the most. And that disconnect doesn't sit well for lots of people when you get into the industry and you see it, which is why Jeff said there were so many other companies there's so many companies working on this, both companies and consumers, and anyone who just gets to know the industry says this doesn't quite feel like you want. Like that disconnect doesn't feel good. So we're working on this equity legislation to resolve that. And this is true of any state. Like this is not Oregon. Oregon didn't get this wrong. States all over aren't doing well with this. So nationally, there's smaller rates of ownership among people of color in cannabis than any other small business sector. So whether we're talking about Asians or African Americans or Latinx communities, they own fewer cannabis businesses than own restaurants or auto mechanic shops or tech businesses. So any other sector, there's more ownership than there is in cannabis, which means we have got hurdles, but that's true nationally. So we looked at this at a state level because as Jeff explained, Jeff with a J, that we're illegal at a federal level. So states are deciding how these industries look and how they're regulated. So at a state level, we really had an opportunity to come in with some legislation that would right that disconnect, the disconnect that we see between who owns and who benefits and who was harmed in the war on drugs. So I'm going to share screen if I can, and just have a visual to share with you all this legislation. And as I walk through it, share how we are, through regulation, really, I think, evolving the cannabis industry in Oregon for the better. Okay. So you all tell me if my, yeah, great, you can see that. And then if I ever get choppy, I might take the video off because my computer's probably doing a lot bandwidth-wise right now. So confirm my audio is still working. So we have this bill that we've been working on since July, and the we is a really large work group to the just diverse group of folks who make up, I've said, industry business owners from small mom and pop businesses to our large multi-state operators. And then you have people who've been working on issues of equity within Oregon, like myself, or nationally, like myself, but also within states that that I haven't been in and that I haven't seen. And so all those states, we have people from various different states coming with their perspectives and what they've done in other states. And then we've had the agencies. We've had a lot of the agencies who will be helping make this work happen within communities and with for cannabis licensees involved. So I think that's good news about how much support there is for what I'm sharing with you. So we were also trying to really do some transformative work and be best in class with equity legislation. So by learning from other states, we applied these learnings. And the first thing that is really becoming standard with cannabis equity legislation, many states have it, is ensuring that the cannabis tax revenues that continue to grow, even in this down economy, go to repair the economic harm that was done when the communities, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx, were over arrested. So our data says that those are the communities in Oregon. And an arrest and conviction, if you don't know, drains your economic resources. It impacts your ability to get a student loan. It impacts your ability to get a small business loan. It impacts where you can live, and not just whether you can access the finances to buy a home, but you'll have apartment complexes in better neighborhoods will do background checks and you can't live there. You can't kind of shift neighborhood in order to improve a school district, which is a common thing families do. So there's so many ways in which the arrest and conviction impacts you long-term, but and your children's outcomes, but also your immediate outcomes, which is what people usually think of. There's statistics about how large percentages of parolees are homeless or among our houseless community. So there's just such a connection between your ability to build wealth for yourself and your family and arrest and incarceration. And so, this summer gave us all, I think, an opportunity to sit with issues of over-policing. And so this, sits in that same space because cannabis, when it was criminal, was used as a tool to arrest people of color. So if we can take cannabis tax dollars and invest directly into the places where those communities were harmed, education, income building and skill building around for jobs, investments into small businesses, then you can repair and you can, I think, do what we have a really important opportunity to do now that we've decided that it makes sense for cannabis to be legal. The next piece of this is to create more diversity among who owns cannabis businesses. So I talked about ownership, and we have a really good program here in Oregon, but we can make it better. We can reduce some of the hurdles that we have around the cost of a license. While our licenses are less expensive than other states, by a lot, they're also more expensive by a lot than a liquor license. So we have an opportunity to reduce that hurdle for people of color who have less access to capital. So we also have some other, and I won't get into too much of the nitty gritty, but some other ways that you can reduce the hurdles that make it more difficult for people of color to move through the licensing process, because there are a lot of steps. So we're able to reduce some steps, and we're able to provide them more support at the regulatory agency to help them through the process. The last thing is capital. So across any industry, Black and brown entrepreneurs are funded significantly less than other entrepreneurs. The stat is that for venture capital funding, African Americans receive, of venture capital funded companies, 1% or less are owned by African American owners. So that's, that's just an inequity. And in cannabis, it's even harder to get capital. So providing capital to these business owners is a requirement. A license is not an actual business. So in order to really execute on this and see what we want to see, you have to add the capital piece. Cannabis expungement is another common piece of cannabis equity. So when I talk about cannabis equity, San Francisco and Oakland did some specific cannabis equity regulation. California has. New York didn't legalize recreational because they didn't have equity. There were activists able to stop it. So this has become a common way that cities and states think about how do we address wrongs. And expungement is usually part of cannabis equity legislation. And we have an opportunity. We have existing cannabis expungement laws. We have an opportunity to make them better. It's a stat that less than 200 of folks who currently have eligible expungement laws on their records have expunged, less than 200. The total number is 28,000. What are the hurdles keeping us from actually removing this burden for people? And we've identified that they are in large part fines and fees. So folks who still owe the judgment of the court for what we no longer consider a crime can't be expunged because they still owe. And what I've seen doing expungement work, and for myself, is it's usually folks who have the less resources in our society, which is also Black and brown folks. African Americans have recent census data, $9,000 on average wealth compared to 30,000 or 70,000 for other minorities or white households. So when you can't pay, put gas in your car or make ends meet, you can't also pay the fines and fees, and they do add up. So it becomes a really big burden for people. Now it's accruing interest, and we're going to say we forgive that. We're also making it automatic. And I can explain to you the details of that, but I won't. But we've, as a great work group, figured out how to do that, because if you understand the process, you know it can't truly be automatic, but we're making it so that people don't have to go and declare and get fingerprints and work with an attorney and go through a lot of hurdles that keep people from expunging. Okay, the last thing we've got is a cannabis equity governing body. We've learned from other states and cities that you have to have basically a group of people who this is their job to make sure that the investments that you're trying to make achieve the outcomes you want to achieve. So we're putting funds towards that. And as I talk about funds, I think it's an important moment. We've had so many members of this work group to say that we are asking in this bill that a portion of cannabis taxes be used for these purposes that I've outlined. And what we know is that any government doesn't have unlimited resources. So we are asking, and we believe that communities would like to see us shift these cannabis taxes and ensure that they're invested where our values are and invested into these things that we believe need to be done. So that's the ask, is both for this work to be done and for the cannabis taxes to go towards this work. That was a lot about the bill, and I hope it also gave a sense of the cannabis industry. It's capital intense, and we are starting to see, even in a very small business pro landscape like Oregon, consolidation of cannabis businesses and larger cannabis businesses. And that's good. There is a place for that, and that's important. I think in Oregon we'll always maintain that some of that craft small business pipeline as well, and set of businesses as well. This gives us the opportunity to ensure that those businesses are also diverse. And if we do it right at both levels, that we have diverse ownership among the large businesses and the craft smaller businesses. There's a lot of opportunity in cannabis overall. Jeff already talked about the how much the revenue, where the revenue is. It's a really good opportunity for people, if they want to be entrepreneurs, to build some wealth, to build a legacy, or to just start a small business that supports their lifestyle. So we highly encourage it for people of color to consider and make successful runs at. We've seen several wonderful businesses doing this and the work that we do.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeanette. That was really interesting. And I'll talk about some different aspects of the financial side of the business, and then that'll dovetail back into what Jeanette's talking about, because you know, as she points out, one of the key issues is access to capital, concentration of capital, and you know, I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, and then we can talk about it during the chat also. But I'll start by talking about some of the challenges of being CFO of a cannabis company, and then talk about the financial side. As Jason said, I'm the CFO of Wild. We're a producer of cannabis and CBD companies and CBD sparkling waters. Our cannabis gummies are sold in 4 states, and our CBD gummies, which get their CBD from hemp, are available nationwide. And I've been with the company off and on since 2017. I've seen it grow. Talk about company growth. When I started with the company, it had about 20 employees, all based in Portland. And now we have almost 500 employees spread across 4 states. In the Portland Business Journal's rankings of private companies, we were the 2nd fastest growing company in Oregon in 2018, and the 3rd fastest growing company in Oregon in 2019. And our CEO is a first-time CEO, 31 years old. We're a classic entrepreneurial success story. And what we've been able to do is just been able to grow. And I say our growth has been wild, so to speak. But we're a successful company in a rapidly expanding industry. If we look at nationwide, cannabis sales are somewhere in the, call it, 10 to $15 billion range for 2019. The forecast is that the industry gets to be 30 billion plus in 2024, and that's just the legal side. There's still a significant amount of illegal cannabis in the market, and there's a constant balance between the legal side of the market and the and the illegal side of the market. As CFO of a cannabis company, my team and I face some unique challenges resulting from operating a successful business in an industry that's illegal under federal law. The biggest challenge is that because interstate commerce in cannabis is prohibited, we have 4 production facilities in 4 states we currently operate in. By the end of 21, we'll have 8 production facilities and 8 buildings that we'll be in. So 8 states that we'll be in. So we have 4 buildings, 4 sales teams, 4 production teams, 4 management teams, which creates just a highly inefficient way of doing business. But it's what we have to do. The barriers to our growth, or the impediments to our growth, is like I say, federal illegality. So there's no interstate commerce in cannabis. So production facilities have to be in each state in which we operate. Also, as a result, related, we have no commercial banking. So we rely on state chartered credit unions and a collection of non-bank leasing and finance companies. So our cost of funds is much higher than a typical company, and the type of services that we can rely on from our credit union partners is much more limited. And then the industry doesn't have access to credit cards. So there's a lot of cash transactions. On a day-to-day basis, our sales team picks up bags of cash or paper checks from dispensaries. We rely on a network of armored cars to get our cash to our credit unions. Electronic payments, which are widely used in the non-cannabis part of the world, are atypical, and we're blocked from using many of the usual electronic payment networks. So, for example, I don't know if people are familiar with Bill.com, which is a small business electronic payment system, and Bill.com doesn't work with cannabis companies. So we rely more on cash, checks, and just whatever workaround we can come up with that still works and survives regulatory scrutiny. And then one of the big things is that there's a section of the Internal Revenue Code, the tax law, 280E. And what 280E does is that it creates a punitive tax scheme where we're not allowed to deduct general administrative expenses on our taxes. So we can deduct all the expenses that we use to create product, but we can't deduct anything else, which puts us at a significant disadvantage compared to a typical business. So, and then the last thing is that we have no access. We don't work with like most of the big national law firms. We don't work with any of the big national accounting firms. So we rely on the different people who are working in the sector, but we're cut off to part of the infrastructure that most other companies have access to. And then industry research is limited, pay to play is common. So if you're looking for information on a cannabis company because you're thinking about partnering with a company for something, or if you're an investor, you're looking to invest in the company, there's not a lot of good information out there about how to do that. Despite all of that, cannabis has grown into a major industry. So if you look at cannabis being, say, in this $10 to $13 billion range for 2019, prescription pain medications are $16 billion. Craft beer is $29 billion. So despite the impediments to operating in the legal sector of the cannabis industry, the industry has grown to be a significant part of the economy, and will continue. So then, addressing the question of capital, what we saw in 2018 is that there was a huge amount of cash that flowed into the industry. A lot of companies were taking the Uber and WeWork approach of, let's go out and raise a bunch of money. If we lose it, great. If we win, great. But hopefully we'll outlast everyone else. And that was fine until 2019. And then in 2019, all that capital started to dry up as losses accumulated. So like Uber and WeWork, we're just going to lose money and hope that the markets fund us and hope that we survive. So now a lot of companies are starved for cash, starved for capital. But what's happened is that a handful of these, what they call MSOs, which are multi-state operators, have achieved profitability or are on path. So a lot of capital is flowing into these like big companies that are operating in multiple states. And and there's four that kind of stand out in the industry right now, and they all have market caps of $2 billion, $3 billion, $4 billion. And but the companies that just adopted this land grab approach of we're going to lose money until everyone else drops by the wayside, and then we'll make money after that, just isn't working. So so outside of these four companies, a lot of these big MSOs are really just struggling to stay afloat. And so with the industry consolidating, we have all these new markets. I don't know, on election day, I think there were five new, if I recall right, five new adult use markets. So if you look at some of the markets like Arizona, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, these are potentially big markets for the industry with lots of revenue coming in. But the MSOs are already established in the new markets that are coming online, which makes it even that much tougher for companies that are just getting started, run by entrepreneurs or owned by people of color, and as Jeanette said, people of color who have been disproportionately victimized by the war on drugs and are now trying to just get some, get a piece of the pie, just to get a toehold in the industry that, as Jeanette pointed out, is becoming increasingly white and corporate. So with that, I think I'd like to just turn it back to Jeff and Jeanette, and just say, given the concentration, how do companies that come into the industry through social equity, whether it's lotteries or it's the social equity legislation, how do they compete with these big companies?
Jeff, I can answer that.
That'd be great, Jeanette. That would be
Okay.
great.
So I talked about the tension between having the craft companies and the MSOs, and there's definitely always the opportunity, even without as much capital as an MSO, for a small company with the right idea to create a big company, to have the right formulation, the right genetics, the right pulse on the cannabis consumer. And I think you see that with other craft companies that have surpassed and surprised big companies. I remember when Coca-Cola had to buy vitamin water and Facebook had to buy Instagram. So you've got the opportunity because this small company had gotten so big, and then that was an exit for both of those companies that small entrepreneurs can still see, I think, in cannabis. And we just have to give them enough working capital to get off the ground and to put them on par with what their white counterparts receive. So if we can just create equity in capital amongst the craft companies, for example, then I think we can cover the gap.
That's great. No, thank you. That's a good answer. We have a couple questions from people who are on the call, and I thought I'd just ask, and anybody in the group can answer the question. But first question is, how has COVID-19 and the lockdown affected cannabis in Oregon? And then what do we think is going to happen as a result of the current freeze?
Jeff, I think I can handle that one. When COVID first hit, when the pandemic first hit, cannabis companies were determined to be essential businesses. And so we were allowed to stay open under some, pretty tight guidelines. We had to set out operating plans for each one of our facilities where we were able to, separate people by 6 feet. We offer curbside delivery now. We offer home delivery. So we've done what we can do to make it easier and safer for people to be able to continue to get their cannabis. But we are essential businesses, and so we are allowed to stay open. This week, as the new regulations go into effect, not much changes for what we have been doing inside our stores already. But we did go through this week and kind of do a review with all of our stores on what they have to do, and the mask mandates and the signage and the cleaning and everything else that is required for us to run safe operations. But I would say that we have seen a significant increase in people wanting curbside delivery or home delivery too. So
great, thanks, Jeff. Second question we have is, and I think Jeanette, you're probably the best person to answer this one. One of the participants on the call is talking about the difference between CBD and cannabis, and does CBD have a lower barrier to entry, and is CBD a good place for a social equity program to take root?
It does have a lower barrier to entry, and as part of the work New Leaf does, we work with CBD businesses as well, and I counsel businesses to consider CBD, and we've seen it. We've seen a couple of our entrepreneurs shift from THC to CBD so that they can get off the ground faster. So that's definitely a piece of it. So that was a really good question. We want to see diversity in both. So we want to also scale the hurdles in THC, but yeah, CBD is a good place to encourage people to be.
Great, good, thanks. And then, I'd like to just ask one other question I think dovetails. I think Jeff and Jeanette were both talking about the number of licenses that are in Oregon and what it means in terms of people entering the industry. Other states have adopted a different approach where very limited licensing. From a social equity point of view, is it advantageous to have a large number of licenses allow more people into the industry, a greater number of people? Or is it advantageous to have a limited number of licenses and have people access the industry through like a lottery or a social equity program or something along those lines?
It is advantageous to have unlimited licenses. That is 100% the best approach. The second you limit licenses, even if your number is large, in Illinois, they've gotten large in terms of the number of licenses they've agreed to pass out. There's still a lot more valuable. We have a moratorium in Oregon, which isn't the same as a limit, and a slowdown. Licenses just aren't being approved very fast. And even a slowdown in approvals has increased the value of licenses, because an existing license now is worth so much more because I could get off the ground now. And once you increase the value of licenses, I haven't explained why that matters. It's harder for people of color who have less access to capital to get a license. So, and women and veterans and anyone with less access to capital, you just reduce the diversity you're going to see among your owners, and then you reduce the innovation, and you reduce really, I think, how much revenue could contribute to your industry.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. Another question from one of the participants is, just as a consumer, what do we need to look for on safety and potency? And Jeff, you're on the regulatory side. That sounds like it might be in your area.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. As everybody knows, about a year and a half ago, we had a really significant issue with inhalable products and vape products. And it caused all of us, I think, to really step back and look at exactly how we're doing things at Groundworks. What we decided to do at that point was to eliminate anything from our stores that was not derived from cannabis. So we now no longer accept products that have even botanical terpenes from other plant sources. We don't accept any products that have any kind of fillers in them, like MCT oil or PEG or a number of the other items that seem to be, potentially causes of some of those issues that people have faced. And I think there's a new set of rules that are coming down from the OLCC right now that a lot of us have been working on, that's going to improve the requirements on companies to disclose the exact ingredients in their products, to label those and to provide that information and make sure that those products have been tested and are safe to be vaporized and inhaled. We have a pretty good testing regimen already in Oregon. They are looking at some changes in that as well. But if I was gonna, say one thing that you should be looking for is that any product you buy should be completely derived from cannabis products. And Jeff, I don't know if you agree with that completely or not, but it's something that Groundworks has adopted and we feel very comfortable with going forward.
Great, good, thanks, Jeff, appreciate it. Another question from panelists is, about the stock market and where the stock market is heading for cannabis companies, and then asking about the distinction between Canadian-based companies and US-based companies. And you know, I can start with that, and then I'll turn it over to the rest to the other panelists and for their comments. But it seems that the activity right now is from a revenue point of view is in the U.S. I mean, Canada is a much smaller market, and Canada's had some hiccups in terms of rolling out adult use cannabis, and they're kind of restarting what they did poorly a couple years back. So, so the companies that seem to be thriving right now are the U.S. All companies, all the public companies are based in Canada in some sense, because you can't really have a publicly owned cannabis company in the U.S. But even the U.S. based companies that are technically based in Canada, they're really all focused on the U.S. You know, I think that'll change over time. I think the Canadian companies will become like, you know, have better opportunities for success. But right now, activities, you know, and capital is really flowing to the companies that are focused on the U.S. The other thing is that most of the rest of the world is behind the U.S. and Canada for that matter in terms of legalization, both for medical use and adult use. And you know, Canada in some ways is an easier place to create an international business than the U.S. right now. That could change. So so like I say, the companies that seem to be thriving on the public side seem to be the U.S. based companies. We'll see what happens with the Canadian companies though. Let's see if we have anything else. Another question from the participant: where is the industry in terms of scientific research on the benefits of cannabis? You know, pregnancy, safety and pregnancy situation, anxiety reduction, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and the person who asked the question, you know, points out, of course, that because the cannabis is federally illegal, you know, research into the potential health benefits is pretty limited and difficult. So, you know, I'll turn that over to Jeff and Jeanette. You know, what do you see in terms of the health benefits and additional research on that?
I'll say two things about it. One, we actually put research into our equity bill because I appreciate the person sharing why we've got the gap in research. So states are going to have to ask or legislate even research. Pennsylvania did it. And it was one of the things that made their medical legalization notable, is that they said we are going to do research as a state. So we said the same, that we needed to build in research and have that be part of what we're asking for in the bill. The second thing is you can look globally. We had this pre-discussion before this started. So you can look globally and see more research happening, with Israel being actually the place where the most of the research that we've got about CBD and THC and the endocannabinoid system has come from.
And I guess the only thing I'd add to that is that there's a growing body of people like Dr. Rachel Knox here in Oregon, who are doing tremendous work on trying to study the efficacy of cannabis on a variety of conditions. And I think that is going to be the huge growth area of this industry over the coming years.
It makes sense. Another question from one of the participants, asking if there's any industry-wide training programs in existence for bud tenders or administrative finance management, et cetera, as an entry point for social equity. And I know, Jeanette, that's something that you're very involved in.
There are a lot. I don't know a number that are industry-wide, but there are a lot of programs within cities or within states where groups are serving and providing training. We have one here in Oregon, Green Hop Academy was its name, and it's run by Green Muse, a dispensary here in Oregon.
Yeah, that's great. And Green Muse actually is across the street from me.
Here we go.
That's great. And then the last question that's currently in the queue, at least, is from Saul, which is Saul Corn of MJCC, which is, what do you think happens on the federal side in terms of legalization over the next 10 years?
Oh, that's such a great question, because
Why I played Saul.
things seem to change so dramatically in Washington all the time. I think a lot depends on potentially what happens with the two Senate races right now. I don't think we'll see federal legalization if we continue to have divided government. I think from an industry standpoint, the areas that we are most focused on right now are, as Jeff mentioned earlier, banking, which is a critical issue, and the other is a tax law called 280E, which essentially prohibits all legal cannabis companies from deducting virtually all of our expenses for rent and labor and utilities and other typical business activities. And the only thing that we are allowed to take off of our revenue are the cost of our goods sold. And so that essentially gives us an effective tax rate of 50%. Or close to it, and is probably one of the major factors for cannabis businesses who are struggling right now. If we can get rid of 280E and fix the banking situation, then I think, you know, federal legalization, A, will become less important, and B, probably will be easier to achieve over time.
Jeanette, anything you'd add to that, or?
No, that's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, for me too. Jeff, I think you summarized the issues perfectly. So the it'll definitely change things, and I know there's separate efforts to help with banking legalization, and then there's some talk of potentially federal medical marijuana legalization that would be before adult use, and but right now I think we're all just reading. You know, we're just guessing. So, terrific. I don't think that we've got any additional questions from participants. If that's the case, then I'll turn it back over to Saul. And Saul, do you want to close us up?
Sounds good. So first, I want to thank our presenters today, Jeff and Jeanette. I think we all learned a lot, and I know this was one of the panels that was most on the was most desired by our community. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Congregation Neve Shalom's COVID-19 Outreach and Services. I know they had scheduled some testing here at the MJCC this Sunday, and you can find information about that online. I'm not sure how that has been affected by the current freeze, but I will try and get information out about that. I want to thank our series sponsors, Barry and Carla Benson, Gewurz Menashe, Portland State University, Jonathan Singer of Pardon Singer PC, the Jerry and Helen Stern Grandchildren's Fund of OJCF, Stuart Gordon Strauss, Architect PC, and Turner Construction Company. And our next business Zoom will be Thursday, December 17th at noon. We're looking at property management in the time of COVID-19. And our panelists will include Eric Kornblit from Intel, Cliff Hockley from Bluestone and Hockley, and the panel is still in formation. This and all of our other business Zooms are available on YouTube and on our website, which is oregongcc.org/pdxbiz. And again, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks to Jeff and Jeanette for help being on the panel.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I'll give one last shout out to what Jeff put in the chat about the supporting the Cannabis Equity Act.
Definitely. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.